College's Board of Governors is returning to talk about item 4.4, state and federal updates. Vice Chancellor Marlene Garcia. I'm wasting time. We're very excited to hear how the two-year session ended. Please tell us.
Good afternoon, Madam President.
Good
Chancellor,
afternoon.
is this on?
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
And members of the board. I'll give you an update on the state. I'll give you a state legislative update, and I'll be giving you a federal update, and then talk to you about our plans for looking to next year in terms of your legislative package. Let me start with the state legislative report. As you know, the regular two-year session adjourned August 31st, just after midnight. And I think it's fair to characterize it as one of the more contentious and very active end of session periods. There were a number of major issues unfolding those last 2 days before the end of session, many of which did not include us, which is probably a good thing, but some of which did. Most of our priority bills that we've been speaking to you about all year and monitoring very closely were all addressed prior to the last 2 nights of session. So for the most part, we were out of that last minute hustle. The major bills are, I'm going to give you a broad highlight. You have your legislative reports, both state and federal, where you can get all the details and the matrix, which will give you the status of every bill we've been tracking. But what I'm going to focus on are those broad highlights and of activities that took place at the end of session. So the first bill is SB 1440, which you all are familiar with. I don't need to get into details about what the bill does, but rather I'd like to tell you where we're at with this bill. It, of course, was approved by the legislature unanimously, bipartisan support, lots of very supportive, favorable comments about this bill, that this was one of the most significant bills approved that addresses important higher education issues in the decade, and that folks have felt this was a long time in coming. So I think there are a number of organizations that were responsible for the passage, particularly our chancellor and this board, the chancellor of the CSU, and of course the co-sponsors, along with the Board of Governors, the CSU, the Campaign for College Opportunity, and our Community College Student Senate, as well as the student organization from CSU. So it had broad support. It was historic in the way this legislation moved through. Now, it didn't move through without bumps in the road, and we dealt with those along the way. And I think that there were some, as you know, with any major legislation, even this one, that just makes so much sense. Its power is its simplicity, but the devil's in the detail. So there were many details that were addressed dealing with how you mandate such a proposal in an environment where we do not support mandates, but I think that there were some creative ways to address that issue, and I think the League in particular was helpful in helping us address that issue. As far as this bill, it's on the governor's desk. We're hopeful that it'll be gaining a signature, and at the point that it is signed, should it be signed into law, there will probably be a signing ceremony, and so there'll be more details about that. We're expecting that it may take place possibly in Southern California, but we don't have any firm details about that, but this is a significant bill that should garner that kind of attention. The bill also, because of the devil being in the detail, both Chancellor Scott and Chancellor Reed are going to convene a task force to develop the implementation details for this bill. This transfer degree is going to be implemented next September, the beginning of the academic year, and that's record time for this kind of major policy. So there are a number of details to permit this bill or this law to go into effect, and students be able to take advantage of this opportunity very quickly. And I do want to add one more point about this implementation and helping students transition into this new program, is that our academic senate, under the leadership of Jane Patton and and many others have been involved in conversations with the CSU academic senates, and they are talking about ways to facilitate the alignment of courses to make it easier for students. And I think that's critical work that's outside of the requirements of the bill, but it's something that they see will make this an even more effective statewide policy, and they're working cooperatively to try to do this in time for next September's implementation. So we're very encouraged, and I think we all agree that this is landmark legislation and something that will really make a difference for the students at the community colleges transferring to the CSU. Now, there is a companion bill that I want to mention, and that is AB 2302 by Assemblymember Fong, a good friend of the community colleges. His bill is as a companion measure to 1440, and what it does is it includes a number of provisions that help with implementation, so it's complementary. It also includes a provision to have the CSU and the community colleges work together to develop a strategic way in which to inform students about this new opportunity. It also has an intent language, the desire that CSU follow suit and implement a similar guarantee program. UC, what did I say, CSU? UC. And that they will be required to submit a report by the end of next year talking about how they will implement a similar type program. And so that is encouraging, because I think in the long run, if all higher ed is working on a similar policy and providing a similar opportunity for community college students, it makes it that much easier for our students. So we think those two bills together make a very attractive transfer package. A second bill is SB 1143, and I'm not going to get into details about that bill because Chancellor Scott will be talking to you about the task force and should this bill get signed into law. But I do want to make a point about the importance of this task force. There's a tendency to refer to this task force as, the board of directors are going to convene this task force to study how to improve student success. This is more than a study. This is requiring the Board of Governors to convene a task force to develop a plan and implement this plan for improving student success. That's a big responsibility, and it's really not just a study. So we think that this is significant, and the most significant part of this is that the community colleges have been called to step up to the plate and address these very tough issues. It's not easy, and I think that this chancellor and this board has made a commitment to look at all the different best practices taking place in our state already and best practices around the country to determine what makes the most sense for California and to take steps to bring those improvements as quickly as possible. So it is a significant effort, and one that we're hoping the governor agrees with us and signs the bill. Another bill, AB 2682, this is the common assessment bill that would be provided online to colleges free of charge, so that they'd all be dealing with one common assessment tool that would be able to help students get placed into the correct classes. This bill got out of the legislature unanimously. Republicans, Democrats supported the bill. We were in negotiations with the Department of Finance and actually had some good discussions with them, because they were interested in ensuring that any common assessment tool we develop for English, math, and English as a second language would build off of existing work that the state has already invested in. And we believe that makes sense, and that was certainly something we'd like to look at and build off of as we move forward and determining what common assessment works for California community college students. Unfortunately, time ran out at the end of session. We weren't able to agree to precise language, but we're hopeful that we can continue working with the Department of Finance and the administration, and that we gain support for this bill as well. But we don't know what the outcome of this will be once it reaches the governor's desk. Now, the last couple of days of session, and you probably read about this in the newspaper, there were a number of compensation bills that came up. These were bills that were amended. Session was on Tuesday, last day of session was Tuesday, August 31st, and these bills were basically in print Monday, the day before. So there was a mad scramble to understand what these different compensation bills did because they targeted local government. So community college local governing boards were swept into some of these proposals because they are treated as local government entities. There were ultimately a couple of these bills that were passed, and they do have some impacts on the local trustee boards. And we worked with the league and others who were very active in those final days in getting these bills amended. But one in particular is AB 827 by Assemblymember Delatorre. And this is a bill that would prohibit certain practices in terms of automatic renewal of CEO contracts at the local governing board level. And if in fact a CEO was going to be granted a raise that was above the CPI, the original version of the bill would have required a public performance evaluation in a board meeting. That everyone pointed out was problematic, and that not necessarily the most effective way to evaluate performance, and the legislature saw it fit to remove that provision and instead permit the evaluation to occur in closed session, but if the local CEO was to get a raise above the CPI, then a summary of that performance evaluation would be provided in public session. So it would be a summary, not the actual performance evaluation. But these bills, as you can imagine, were pretty popular, and they were moving through the system or the process fairly quickly. So that bill, I think most were comfortable that the most onerous portions of the bill were amended out, and most community colleges at that point pulled their opposition and just remained neutral. So that was supported, or that was approved by the legislature. The second one, again, it was amended at the last minute, and that's AB 194 by Assemblymember Tirico. And what this one did is it just reduced the limits of pensionable salaries for local government officials, and that would in fact affect CEOs somewhat. And so we monitored that carefully and did not take a position. But these are all bills that have been moving through the system that do have an impact on local governing boards, compensation and retirement. And the details of these bills are in your legislative report. The last bill I will call to your attention is your AB 1460. This was the DREAM Act bill, and it was approved the final night of session, and this is the bill that by Senator Cedillo, that SB 1460 by Senator Cedillo, that would provide access to institutional financial aid to AB 540 students. That was approved, but a second bill was amended that last night of session that would also, a separate bill that would permit AB 540 students to be eligible for Cal Grants. So those two bills actually went through the legislature. I have no idea what their fate is, but they were approved the last night of session and are on their way to the governor. So as far as state legislative activity, despite the challenging year that it's been, despite the fact that we don't have a budget, I think we were able to gain some significant accomplishments. I think it's been instructive this past year about how we can work as partners with the legislature and find ways to help the community colleges do the best job it can possibly do. And I think these are lessons we'll want to take with us next year as we evaluate whatever legislative package we pursue or you pursue as a Board of Governors. So I think it's all in all been a good year for community colleges. If there aren't any questions, I can shift briefly to the federal report.
Sounds good.
Okay. Valerie Purnell is in Washington, D.C. as we speak. There are a number of activities going on there that she will be participating in, including the final month of congressional session prior to recessing for November elections. And she is going to be meeting with members of the U.S. Department of Ed staff members of the U.S. Department of Labor staff, and then members of Congress who we've been, the California delegation who we've been working with. But the big news is that the earmark that was introduced by Senator Dianne Feinstein did make it through the Senate Appropriations Committee and was approved. The process at this point is for this to go into conference later in the year, where they look at all the earmarks approved by both the House and Senate, and that there will be a final vote on all the earmarks. And we're very hopeful that our particular earmark stands a good chance of being approved, gaining final approval. And that, of course, will allow us to highlight a lot of the good work that's taking place within our veterans programs. It's not comprehensive, but it really does help us highlight those exemplary programs, and there are many, but to highlight some of them so that they can reach their maximum threshold, to identify up-and-coming programs that we can give them a little bit of seed money so that they can build. And then the third component is to develop a data infrastructure system that will allow us to track veterans. We do not have that capacity currently, and it's critical in being able to identify the need for veterans in California. So that's going to be a significant development from this earmark that hopefully we'll be able to leverage and even get more support in the future. The other issue that's pending in Washington, D.C. is the Community College Summit, the White House Community College Summit program. There was earlier talk about the summit being held in October. We're hearing that they still plan to have the summit, but it's not likely to take place in October. So hopefully she'll be able to come back and get us more information to ensure that California has a prominent role in that summit when it does take place. But I do understand that there's still a strong commitment to hold this summit. The last thing on federal relations is we're really trying to identify those federal issues where there's a nexus between the prominent issues here at the state level. And Valerie's back east right now trying to talk with folks and figure out what kinds of tangible efforts we can develop for next year, be it earmarks, going after grants that are being made available from Department of Labor and the U.S. Department of Ed. Financial aid seems to be a candidate in that area to try to supplement some of the best practices that we're developing in California. Student success may be another area, and technology. Those seem to be some themes that are definitely aligned between state and federal. So hopefully she'll come back with ideas on what we can pursue at the federal level next year. The last thing I want to mention to you, and because so many of you are new, is that we have a Chancellor's Office convened task force on legislation. This is not the SB 1143 task force. This is an annual task force that we convene to look at different legislative policies that we should package and bring to you for your consideration and for a vote in January, whether or not to sponsor some key bills. The average number of bills that we come to you with in January is about 2 bills, and basically these are the bills that you would vote on and determine that this will be part of our sponsored package. Because of all the activities and the number of very substantive policy issues that were that appear to be moving in the direction of being approved, we thought that we'd probably, step back and look at just those broad policy issues that hit on the themes that, increasing efficiencies, making success easier for students, or helping students afford college be it through digital textbooks, or those types of proposals are typically the kinds of proposals that we look at. How do we make the community colleges function more effectively, and particularly, how do we help students succeed in our system? So those will be the broad parameters in which we'll look at policies. We're probably going to take a more minimalist approach this year because we've got so much on our plate, but just so you know that this will be a process. We have our first meeting October 7th. Everyone from the Consultation Council is invited to participate, and then we have a follow-up conference call, and then we come to you in November with a set of proposed ideas for your consideration and discussion, and the ones that emerge to the top, we come back in January, and then you vote on whether or not that should be your Board of Governors sponsored package of bills. So that process is coming up, and if there are any questions about that, I'm happy to answer your questions.
I do not see any Member Perez.
I just want to thank you for giving us the schedule for the task force. I appreciate that and laying it out for us so we can understand the process of what's going to occur. Thanks.
Okay. Any other comments? Member Baca?
Yeah, I don't have any questions, but I just want to comment. You know, Michelle and I had a meeting over the phone with you last week and had a long talk about all the kinds of things that you've been doing. I just want to thank you very much for keeping us current on legislation, and also on the work that Valerie's been doing with the Vets Connect and the earmark, and I know she's staying on top of it. And you know, that work not only produces a certain amount of funding, but maybe even more importantly, offers us the ability to work more closely with key players, both here and also in Washington. So I want to thank you for your work.
Thank you. Okay, no more comments or questions. We have a member of the public.
Yes, Dennis Frisch from Santa Monica College in FAC.
Good afternoon, President Mallingbud, Chancellor Scott, and members of the board. I'm come to you today as President-elect of FAC. In the past, I think I've spoken to you as a representative from CCCI, but in the spring there were elections. I chose to run for the office of President-elect and was successful. So from this point forward, I think you'll see me as a representative from FACCC or from FAC. This afternoon, I wanted to call your attention to Assembly Concurrent Resolution 138, which was passed by the legislature in this current session. This session just ended. This particular resolution expresses an intent of the legislature on two important faculty issues. One is part-time faculty pay and benefits, in which the legislature expressed its intent that those part-time faculty should be paid equally for the work they do with the compensation given to full-time faculty. So the idea of equal pay for equal work. The second part of this resolution was the intent of the legislature that the full-time faculty percentages be increased to 75%. They reference the longstanding board policy of 75% of credit instruction taught by full-time faculty. And so this resolution reiterated that intent on the part of the legislature. These are important issues to the faculty because, as I'm sure you've heard this morning, there has been a deterioration in the number of full-time faculty over the last few years. We've seen the numbers reducing, a shrinkage, if you like. And of course, our part-time faculty have been very negatively affected by the budget situation, but their compensation has been oftentimes quite a bit lower than what the compensation might be for their full-time colleagues. And we do expect the same kind of work from them. Our criteria for hiring are the same. We should, in fact, have equal pay and equal benefits for the work that they do. So I wanted to call your attention to this concurrent resolution because it is an important issue among the faculty. And we hope that as we do our advocacy work, that we'll keep these two issues in the forefront of our advocacy. It's a chance to continue to educate the legislature to the importance of maintaining quality instruction, and full-time faculty are central to that, as we all know, and that compensation for our part-time faculty, when we use part-time faculty, should be equal to what their full-time colleagues are receiving. So as we advocate, we can educate, and in our local districts, educate as well with our constituencies in that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We will move on to item 4.5, presentation on Title V regulations, policies for prerequisites, co-requisites, and advisories. Vice Chancellor Barry Russell.
Thank you. We've had this board agenda a couple of meetings in a row, and I wanted to set today's discussion just a little bit differently and talk to you, since we're talking about student success, I wanted to just list, and I just off the top of my head made a list of the student success programs and activities that we have pretty much on a statewide basis. Some of them are more at some campuses than others, but obviously we have strong counseling components, summer bridge programs, EOPS, Puente, Mesa, middle college, high school programs, peer tutoring, supervised tutoring, contextualized learning, learning communities, first-year experience programs. We have all of these support systems and, that have been built up to assure that students get the help that they need at the time that they need it. When they identify, I'm in trouble, I need to get some help. And with that backdrop, we also require that all of the colleges, as they go through the course approval process, that they establish certain elements in each course that are scrutinized by the faculty through a process through the curriculum committee to assure that students across the board are getting the same kind of level of education in all of their courses. And so each course is required to have things like objectives, description, hours, whether they're lecture or lab, how many hours are being spent in the class, the methods of instruction so that it can be determined if it's an appropriate method of instruction. The examples of assignments are required, methods of evaluation, and then the one we come to today is the prerequisites and co-requisites, that if you're going to establish those for courses, they have to be included, and the curriculum committee gets a chance to look at that, best thinking of the faculty member who's bringing the course forward, of what those prerequisites and co-requisites and advisory should be. So I wanted to just kind of lay that out, that we have a process in the state, and it's throughout the state at every college, every course, every credit course that is approved on campus follows this process. It's standardized, and it's been used for many, many years. And so I want to set the stage with that, and then turn the rest of the discussion over to Jane Patton and Paul Steinhausen, who is here as a guest, to provide us some more background on this prerequisite issue.
President Malumed, Chancellor Scott, and members of the board, thank you once again for listening to us try to answer some more questions and see if we can help folks to understand why the faculty at 112 colleges through the State Academic Senate have determined that the status quo is not working as well as it should for most of our students, or for a great number of our students. I want to draw your attention to a new handout that was given out. It's a 2-pager. It was given out with the alleged things during the lunch break. So I just wanted you to be sure you have it. The top of it talks about prerequisites.
For us, it's 1 page, 2 sides.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And in addition to that, I'll draw your attention to the handouts that were in your packet for the agenda today, because I'm going to actually refer to those a few times rather than do PowerPoint. I'm just going to highlight a few of the things that you have in your agenda packet, as well as in the handout that I gave you today. And I'm not going to go over that handout in great length. I think it's something you can read later at your leisure. I'll point out a few points that I'd like you to pay attention to, particularly in each of those documents. I hope that by now you appreciate that our only goal is to try to improve student success. And we all know that far too many students either drop out or fail or don't reach their goals in colleges. And so one of the many efforts that we think needs to happen, and this is not a panacea, it's not the only solution, but one of many things we need to do is to ensure that when the students take the really difficult, high-level courses, the ones that they usually take right before they transfer, that they're not going to have to repeat the course or drop out or fail. And we want to make it possible for them to be well prepared. And the way to do that is to signal to them through prerequisites that they will succeed in this course if first they have taken the other required courses, whatever they may be. And sometimes it's they don't even need to have taken that transfer level math and English. It could even be one level below. The prerequisite may not be the highest prerequisite. Now, if you look in your packet that you got sent to you last week, I copied in there for you the PowerPoint presentation that I did in July. And in that presentation, I think I laid out some of the issues and some of the challenges that we face in our colleges. And I just wanted you to have a copy of that to go back to if you have questions. And by the way, if you have questions today or if you have questions next week, I hope that you'll feel free to send me an email and give me a chance to sort of explain and give you some more background, because we really would like everyone to feel comfortable. If you look at the second page of that PowerPoint presentation, the slide sorry, yes, on the second page, the slide that says what should happen and what can happen. You might remember that Member McDougall pointed out a couple questions at the July meeting about that one. And I just want to highlight for you that, unfortunately, what should happen is not always what does happen on our college campuses, in that having prerequisites not for every course across the curriculum, not for every student that walks on campus, but only for those few courses where students are really likely to not succeed if they don't have prerequisites. For those courses in particular, if we let students know that they'll do better if they first have those prerequisites, we think they'll succeed, and we know actually by a lot of research that they will succeed better. So that is one of the main purposes of our trying to change the processes for application of prerequisites. And by the way, you haven't seen our new language yet that we're going to propose for changing Title V. We had given you some draft language back in May, but some points were raised and we recognized that there were some ways to improve that. So you haven't seen that yet. And we were asked today to bring new information and clarify questions, but we were asked not to bring the language yet. So that's why if you're thinking, gosh, I'm not sure exactly what they are proposing, that's because we wanted to first make sure that you have as many questions answered as possible. And when we come back with the precise language, it'll make probably more sense to everyone. A couple other things in the PowerPoint I just wanted to point out to you. On the second slide, I just want to point out the last line on the second slide on the first page. Community college courses should equal the university courses that are the same exact courses. And you know through articulation that many of our classes meet the same exact requirements at the university. When I teach a public speaking class, it's the exact same course that they would take at every university. And I need to be teaching that course at the same level. I need to be requiring the students to do the same amount of research and the same amount of presentations and writing as they do if they were taking that course at the university, because that's the promise that we've made to the university. But the students who are at the university are already at a certain level of English and math, and certainly at UC they wouldn't have even gotten in the door if they didn't already demonstrate that they had the mathematics and the English requirements. So what is happening, unfortunately, is that in many cases we're not able to cover the course material in the same way if a lot of the students in the course really don't have the prerequisite skills. So if we if we can improve the way we apply prerequisites, and you will get the language at a future meeting, we are confident that our students will graduate more frequently. They will transfer more frequently. They will not have to take extra units. They will not need to repeat courses 3, 4, 5, 6 times before they get it right. They will go into the courses at the right time. I want you to know, as I've mentioned before, that there are a lot of important strategies. Many of them we began under the Basic Skills Initiative. Things like having a learning community where 2 or 3 courses are paired and the students get support from counselors. Strategies like that, and strategies like contextualized learning, where particularly in CTE courses, the teachers are also infusing mathematics skills and writing skills and reading skills. We think these are all absolutely important strategies, and we plan to continue all those, but those are not a substitute for making this one correction that we really need to make with prerequisites. Now, there have been some questions raised by folks, and I'd like to present a few responses to some of the questions that have been raised. One question that we've heard raised is, oh my gosh, all of a sudden every class at every college is going to require that the students first have the English 1A or the equivalent level of English skills, and that they all have the highest level of math before they can even walk in the door. And that is a huge exaggeration. The courses where we really feel there are going to be the need for prerequisites are those where students are truly failing at a very high rate. Do you remember at the graph at the July Board of Governors meeting, I showed you some handouts, and you have those handouts from July. I didn't give them that again today. At a couple of colleges, Antelope Valley and Fullerton were a couple of colleges where the likelihood of failing or not successfully completing certain courses was very, very high. Many other courses, the likelihood of succeeding was very high, and you didn't need to have taken any of the prerequisite courses. And so we're really only talking about maybe a handful of courses at each college where students really need to have the prerequisites. Absolutely no one is suggesting that they be across the board, or that they be for a huge number of courses. We're quite certain that will not happen. And I want to point out to you that in the handout you got today, on the first page, there is a series of bullets. And the bullets are similar to what Vice Chancellor Russell was referring to a minute ago. These are the step-by-step processes that are already required at 112 colleges anytime you write or revise a course, or anytime you want to do something like add prerequisites. All curriculum is developed by the faculty with a discipline expertise. All proposals are vetted with the department. So it's not an individual faculty member saying, suddenly, I want all my students to be at a higher level because that's easier for me to teach. That is not at all the process that we go through. The third bullet, new proposals must be approved by the curriculum committees. The administrators are participating in that, the CIOs, the deans, et cetera. The local boards, and those of you who sat on local boards, you know that the boards have to approve curriculum, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to remind everyone that there is absolutely no danger that wayward faculty members are suddenly going to apply an unnecessary prerequisite on courses without a huge amount of vetting and participation from their colleagues. Another question that has been raised, which I think is a legitimate concern, is there may not be enough basic skills sections for students who need to get their basic skills instruction. And so I'd like to address that in a couple of ways. First, there are many, many, many other courses at the college that the students can take while they are learning whatever skills and knowledge they need for the higher level courses. So remember, I think I mentioned this in July, they're not going to be suddenly locked out of everything else on campus. But in addition to that, and this will be a very important part of the proposal that we'll bring to you at a future meeting, our proposal lays out strategies for all local administrators and faculty to develop an enrollment management plan, how they will shift their FTE, their apportionment dollars, from some transfer courses into basic skills to assure that enough students have enough sections. And we're confident that the vice presidents of instruction and the faculty and the college presidents and the trustees are all smart enough to realize that if you do have a need for more students to take reading or math or English or ESL, that you need to provide more sections. Now, as a fact, we've already heard it several times today, we don't have enough sections of anything for students today because we're not getting the funding that we need for the growth that we need. But certainly when you look at the size of the pie at that college or in that district, how those dividing pieces of the pie are created needs to take into account the basic skills learners. So that is absolutely a part of our plan. Another question that has been raised is how will we ensure that implementation is done right? Our proposal recognizes a need for training for administrators and faculty to make sure that they all have all the latest information about doing effective content review. We also are very clear that there is a need for colleges to develop their plan for a gradual application and appropriate application of prerequisites. And very importantly, we recognize that we need to ensure that colleges analyze the impact of any new prerequisites, that they use their campus researchers, that they make sure that there is not a disproportionate impact that has a negative influence, and that we are making sure that the decisions that were made were the right decisions. Well, I'm almost ready to invite our guests to speak for a moment, but before I do that, I just want to mention that at the July agenda meeting, you got a handout that was written by Nancy Shulock, in which she explains some rationale about why in her research that she has done on community colleges, she's come to the conclusion that the proposal that the Academic Senate is making is the right one. And that one is in your packet today as well, the memo that you had received at the last board meeting. I want to point out on the first page of her document at the bottom, she has some bullet points. And if you want to just make note, I'm not going to read them all to you today, but if you just want to make note that those are really, I think, some very key points she makes. The vast majority of students are not prepared for college-level work. The current system for establishing prerequisites is seldom used. It's not effective, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to draw your attention to those bullet points. And then on the third page of her document, item number 2 at the top of the page, the bullet says, allowing students into college courses concurrently with their remedial enrollments is fine as long as the course does not require skills related to those they need remediation in. And that is a very important question or concern that some folks have raised. Oh my gosh, students will have no place to go. They won't have an opportunity to take any other classes, and she addresses that. And then I just want to point out the page number 3, the second half of it, where she explains why she is in support of this proposal. I think that's a really nice section that you may also want to review later. And finally, the last page, and this is a good segue into our guest from the LAO, on the last page gives a quotation from a leading expert, and the end of that quotation says, effective state assessment and placement policies will strike a balance between restrictive and permissive rules. And interestingly, there is a correlation, there is a connection between having statewide assessment, which we are trying to put into place with CCC Assess and a piece of legislation that you just heard about a moment ago, and applying appropriate prerequisites by way of having students, when they enter the college, getting assessed, taking the basic skills they need, taking the courses in the right sequence, and ensuring that the courses where there's a high likelihood of failure, ensuring that they have some prerequisites in place. Nancy Shulock asked me to express her regret. She wanted to come today and highlight a few of her points, but she had to be out of town and was unable to come. But it is my pleasure to now introduce Paul Steinhausen from the Legislative Analyst's Office, and I know that he's spoken to you before about a variety of issues, and he would like to share with you some thoughts from the LAO perspective. So I'll turn it over to Paul Steinhausen. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Paul Steinhausen with the Legislative Analyst's Office. The LAO is the nonpartisan advisory arm of the legislature. We work for members, all the members, both houses and both parties, and we provide information, analysis, and advice on fiscal and policy issues. When I started the community college assignment a number of years ago now, the Basic Skills Initiative was just underway. That was back in the good old days when community colleges, other agencies were not getting cut. Instead, there was some additional money for augmentations, for program augmentations. As a condition of receiving supplemental Basic Skills Initiative money back in 2007, 2008, individual colleges were required to assess the extent to which their own policies and practices aligned with evidence-based best practices, which were identified in this report by a number of community college researchers and other officials. It's called Basic Skills as a Foundation for Student Success in California Community Colleges, so-called Poppy Copy. We were very impressed, actually, with the quality of this work, and we set out to look at the extent to which the best practices identified in this work and other national studies aligned with system-wide policies and practices here in the California community colleges. We were actually surprised to find there was a lot of consensus around what works and what doesn't. That doesn't always happen in research, as you might know. There's, you have these contending schools of thought, and nothing's ever resolved. But there was a lot of consensus here in this document and in, as I said, many other studies that have been done at that time and since. So our report identified a number of areas in the community colleges that were at odds with the research. This included state laws and included regulations as well. In particular, for purposes of this discussion, we found that a number of studies agree that underprepared students should take basic skills coursework as early as possible. Yet, we found that here at the California community colleges, many students do not undergo assessment, and underprepared students are not required to address their basic skills deficiencies within a certain time frame. Many delay addressing these areas where they need to improve. They get rustier and rustier, especially in math, but I can tell you for myself from writing as well, and sometimes reading. And then they can enroll in courses for which they're not prepared. As a result of our report and Basic Skills Initiative and some other works that had come out, then Chancellor Diane Woodruff convened an action planning group to address these issues. It was chaired by then Academic Senate President Mark Wade Liu and Steve Bruckman. We met for the first time 2 years ago, almost to the day, actually, and we met over the course of the next year or so. We did reach a consensus, which again is not always the case with community colleges. We had a lot of representation from various stakeholder groups and did reach a consensus around streamlining the way that faculty can establish math and English prerequisites for outside discipline courses. And of course, the Academic Senate has been a strong supporter of that then and now. The intent of this change is to help students to make sure the courses are appropriate for students given their reading, writing, and math skills. Because there's really nothing more discouraging than enrolling in a course that is just way over your head. We as a state want to ensure that that happens as little as possible. We also want to make sure that students address those foundational skills so that they can succeed and get their associate's degree or transfer. After all, they are going to need to demonstrate college-level proficiency in math and English in order to get an AA and transfer. So why not address those areas immediately and not postpone them? Another advantage is it creates an incentive for students to get assessed. We found, in our report actually, this Back to Basics report, we found data at the time about 10% of students who were required to undergo assessment didn't do so. We've since learned that it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 20–25% of students not undergoing assessment even though they're supposed to. And so it would create an incentive for students. This change would create an incentive for students to get assessed since they can demonstrate that they're ready for a course through their assessment results, as well as they can take a prereq if they don't demonstrate it through assessment. So from the legislature's point of view, the LAO point of view, everyone in that action planning group, academic senate, we can tell you what is not intended with this change. What is not intended is for a student to get assessed, be told, well, you're in elementary math or pre-algebra, and you're 3 levels below freshman composition. So what you need to do is, for the next 2–3 years, you're just going to be taking English and math classes. They're going to be semester long, and we'll see you, maybe. I mean, that's access to what I would say boredom and failure, and that's not what's intended here. There's no opportunity for students to explore areas they're interested in or be taught math and English in a way that references real-life experiences. Instead, the intent is for faculty to carefully review the skills that are needed to succeed in, say, Poli-Sci 101, and then for faculty to identify courses that teach those skills, such as, you need to be able to write a coherent essay of about this length, incorporating and synthesizing various types of scholarly articles. I mean, this is similar as content review process is what's being used for French 1 for French 2, for example, for many courses within a discipline. So, and the idea too is that students would be able to take these courses, these basic skills courses, along with other things that are interesting that don't have these prerequisites that Jane Patton has discussed with you already. Also, courses don't have to be semester length. We're growing more and more convinced that this semester length class where you start at page 1 and progress with this kind of drill and kill approach just does not work. The literature is pretty clear about that. Instead, there are a lot of options like modules, compressed terms, summer programs, intensive summer programs. Many community colleges already use that. Applied learning, learning communities, things that are very interesting for students. In conclusion, the action planning group made sure to include a recommendation that any change include a study to be conducted after this new regulation is implemented to ensure that the change had its desired effect, which is to really give students confidence, create a strong incentive for them to address areas in need of improvement as soon as possible. Thank you.